So, how does a tiny 10,000-word story about a seagull who just really loves to fly become one of the most celebrated and one of the most hated books of its time? It's a story of insane success, a spectacular crash and burn, and a final twist that, honestly, nobody saw coming. Let's get into it. Right from the get-go, Jonathan Livingston Seagull basically split the world in two. For millions of people, it was this deep, spiritual classic, a story about breaking free and finding your true self. But for its critics, it was, to put it lightly, just pretentious nonsense, a total pseudo-cultural ripoff. And there was pretty much no middle ground. You either loved it or you hated it. So how in the world did this little book even take off? I mean, the story of its success is almost as strange as the book itself. You have to picture the scene. We're in the early 1970s, a time of major cultural soul-searching, and this simple fable about a bird just lands at the absolute perfect moment. And the scale of its success was just staggering. By the end of 1972 alone, there were over 1 million copies in print. And get this wasn't some hit that was manufactured by a huge marketing campaign. Nope, this was a pure word-of-mouth phenomenon. People were just reading it, loving it, and passing it to their friends. It just exploded, and it sat on top of the bestseller lists for months on end. But the book didn't just appear out of nowhere. It plugged directly into the vibe, the zeitgeist of the 1970s. This was the era of transcendental meditation. The self-help genre was booming, and the counterculture was shifting focus towards radical individualism. People were searching for spiritual meaning, but they were looking for it outside of traditional churches. And then along comes Jonathan the Seagull, offering a perfect, bite-sized story for this new age of me. Okay, so what was the message at the heart of the book? What was it about this story that had everybody either totally obsessed or completely enraged? Let's break down the gospel of this very, very unusual gull. The plot is actually super simple. It's a classic 3-act hero's journey. First, Jonathan is an outcast. He gets kicked out of his flock because he dares to be different. He wants to fly for the love of it, not just to scrounge for food. Then he transcends. He meets these almost angelic gulls who teach him to master flight and kind of reality itself. And finally, he returns, almost like a prophet, to teach his old flock everything he's learned. And this quote right here, this really gets to the heart of why it was so appealing. It's a message of pure, unfiltered self-belief. In an era where everyone was questioning authority and searching for personal freedom, these words were exactly what millions of people were desperate to hear. But, of course, with that kind of massive fame comes a massive backlash. The same simplicity that made the book a sensation also made it an easy target. And then came the movie, which took an already complicated situation and basically poured gasoline all over it. To be fair, the film did have some defenders. Michael Korda over at Glamour magazine saw it as this thing of overpowering beauty and strength, really buying into its potential as a serious work of art. But that was not the consensus view. Not by a long shot. The legendary film critic Roger Ebert absolutely destroyed it. He famously wrote that he just walked out of the screening. His review called it, and this is the line everyone remembers, the biggest pseudo-cultural, would-be metaphysical ripoff of the year. Ouch. And look, Ebert wasn't just being mean for the sake of it. The movie really was a disaster. It bombed at the box office, and the production itself was a complete train wreck, which led to a truly spectacular legal implosion. I mean, it wasn't just one lawsuit. It was a legal free-for-all. The author, Richard Bach, sued the studio because he hated the changes they made to his script. The composer, the one and only Neil Diamond, sued the director for butchering his music. And some other filmmaker even sued, claiming they stole scenes from a movie he made back in the 1930s. The whole thing just collapsed under the weight of all the fighting. And the story gets even more complicated when you start looking at the man who actually wrote it. Richard Bach's own life was, let's just say, a far cry from the simple, perfect parables he was writing. In fact, it adds this very messy, very human layer to the whole phenomenon. So this timeline of Bach's life is, well, it's pretty revealing. Around the same time his book about seeking a higher truth becomes a massive hit, Bach divorces his first wife, Bet, who he had 6 kids with. He later marries an actress named Leslie Parrish, who he famously calls his soulmate in his other books, and then, 20 years later, he divorces her too. And Bach's own explanation for the divorce just adds another layer of weirdness to it all. When he was asked about divorcing his soulmate, he gave this unbelievable explanation. He reframed the end of their marriage not as a failure, but as a predestined graduation. It's a statement so strange, it kind of forces you to re-examine the man and his entire philosophy. So, just when you think the story's over, there is one last absolutely shocking twist. Decades later, in 2014, a new edition of the book comes out, and it has a fourth part that Bach wrote way back in the 70s but never published. And this new ending? It changed everything. This new chapter is all about this one concept, the misinterpretation of doctrine. It's all about how a simple, pure message of freedom can get twisted and corrupted over time, eventually becoming the very thing it was supposed to fight against, just empty, rigid dogma. And you can see the corruption of the message so clearly here. 200 years after Jonathan, his original message, to practice, to seek freedom, to fly, is totally lost. So what are the Gauls doing instead? Well, they're building little shrines out of pebbles in his name. They're worshiping him like a god. They're reciting holy words instead of actually flying. They turned a message of doing into a religion of just ritual. So we're left with this final massive question. After watching his simple little book become this huge cultural phenomenon, spawn a disastrous movie, and get interpreted and misinterpreted by millions, did Richard Bach use this final chapter to issue the ultimate critique? Was he warning us not about some fictional flock of seagulls, but about what we had turned his own book into? It's a fascinating, mind-bending, full-circle ending to one of the strangest stories in publishing history.